Season 2 of Severance is in the books. So what happened and where do we go from here? Let's talk about it. The Season 2 finale for Severance is up on Apple TV Plus, and it comes as a longer episode than the rest of the season. And if you haven't watched it, go watch it, come back, as we'll be getting into heavy spoilers for Season 2 and looking ahead to Season 3. And before we move on, the show has been officially announced for Season 3. Not that we didn't know it was coming before anyway, with the way Ben Stiller was talking, but he said it wouldn't take near as long to get done, so hopefully he stays true to his word. All right, so the finale starts where Episode 9 ended off, with Innie, Mark, Devin, and Miss Cobell talking about what needs to happen next. Devin gives Mark a camcorder with a message from his Outie that basically tells him, hey, Outie Mark's wife is alive, and they have a plan to rescue her from the testing floor and use her kidnapping to take down Lumon. You're kind of left wondering the whole time whether or not Miss Cobell will end up being good or bad, and there's all sorts of theories out there that Devin could be bad too. And I guess we still won't really know for sure, depending on what happens in Season 3. The argument back and forth between Innie Mark and Outie Mark is actually a great argument, I think, and they're debating points about which life holds value over the other. The show has always been about more than just work-life balance. Instead, it tackles a lot of similar themes to cloning. Does a clone's life mean as much as the original person used for the cloning? Does a clone have a soul? Can a clone love? This is essentially a clone, but even more so than that, it debates the same clone points, but with the actual same physical person. My wife kept saying, look, I don't see what the big deal is for Innie to go away because it's the same person. But then I brought up the point. Well, what if you walked out the front door like it was a normal day and you just never woke up again? You would die. Mark's Innie is just as much a person as Mark's Outie is. They're very much the same Mark and different Marks at the same time. It's an interesting debate that I can't imagine what would be like if this was a real life scenario. They go back and forth trying to value who should win in this debate. Should Mark's Innie give in, save Gemma, and potentially die? Or should Mark's Outie live 2 lives and allow his other half to be in love with Helly? What would Gemma or Helly even think of that? Outie Mark promises, look, we'll reintegrate. But Innie Mark knows that he can't trust anybody at this point in time except for himself. And by himself, I mean only Innie Mark's himself, not his other half. Also, with reintegration, they become one person. So who do they end up loving? Gemma? Or Helly, or both. He knows Helly is actually Helena, obviously, and that she probably won't reintegrate, and that if they take down Lumon, both Helly and Innie Mark will die. So he says no to the plan and says that the next time I wake up, it better be on the Sever floor, you're going to be sorry. So the next time he wakes up, ding, is on the Sever floor elevator. There's a whole lot that had to have happened between him storming out of the cabin and then waking back up at work. I do hope we see some of that next season to see what exactly went into Outie Mark's mind into making the decision to ultimately let him go back. We don't really get enough time with Outie Mark to explain things, only to grab Gemma and get the heck out of the testing floor. I know he didn't really have much of a choice, but he did just trust his Innie to get it done, and he did. So when Mark gets there, Helly gets off right behind him. Or is it Helly or Helena? Britt Lauer said that it definitely was Helly there at the end, but that is what you would say, Helena. They see a new painting that shows off everyone involved in the show standing at the falls where Irving was fired. It even has Devin and her baby, Rickon, Petey, and all sorts of people that are kind of interesting to be included in a painting like this. Another interesting moment is when Dylan then walks back in on the Sever floor after turning in his resignation. Mr. Milchick gives him a note from his Outie that was actually kind of sweet, basically saying, hey, first off, F you for everything you did, but also telling him, look, I strive to be more like you because I want to make my relationship with my wife better. He gives Dylan the choice, hey, if you want to quit, quit. But instead, Dylan kind of gets some inspiration from the letter, and then he hears a marching band. A marching band? What? He runs to MDR to help Helly stall Mr. Milchick. There's 2 things with the celebration after Mark finishes Cold Harbor. First, how do I join the choreography and merriment department? And second, I'm so confused by Mr. Milchick's approach to everything. He is so clearly uncomfortable with how upper management is treating him, especially because of the color of his skin. But he continues to do what they require of him for his job. And look, I get it. He's a good worker. He's still trying to prove himself, but I would have snapped by now. I do like that he's fighting back in some ways, but I was convinced he was about to turn and help MDR with their quest at any moment, but he never really did. I am interested to see this development a little more, and I guess he's going to need a number 2 since Miss Wong is gone, but I can almost see something like, maybe a temporary alliance comes to move Milchick into more of a position of power, and then he looks the other way while Mark's story plays out. Back to Gemma and Mark, I thought the Cold Harbor test of disassembling the crib was very well written as well. However, my wife brought up a good point that in the flashback to when you're seeing them go through the IVF trials, I believe it's Mark that we see fiddling with the crib and disassembling it, not Gemma. So maybe that's why it didn't trigger any memories in her, because she wasn't the one who physically dealt with the crib. She's out now, and I don't know if it'll ever come up again, but that is something to keep in mind. Mark gets the instructions from Irving, who we don't see this episode, but I very much hope is part of the show moving forward, even though he left town. He finally gets to the door to go down in the elevator and ends up running into Mr. Drummond, who is ready to kill a goat to lead Gemma in the afterlife. Lauren, played by Gwendolyn Christie, and who I assumed had to come back at some point, is tired of killing the goats, so it does make you ask the question, how many goats had they killed before, and is it all for the same purpose? How many Gemmas have there been before, and what exactly does their religion say is going to happen with her and the goat once they're killed? There's a lot of mystery surrounding the religious nature of Lumon and the Egans and their cult and just how broad their reach in the world actually is. And I'd love to have some sort of Lumon Bible at some point when the show is over to be able to learn a little more about what exactly is going on. Also, are all of these goats and all the people taking care of the goats meant just for a sacrifice every now and then? There has to be something more, I feel like, with the goats and the mammalians nurturable department, which is hard to say. And speaking of killing the goat, is the plan to just kill Gemma because her testing is done? Or are they saying that she'll die in the mental and emotional sense because her identity as Gemma will be done? Or will just the 25 severances fry her brain or something? Either way, Mark threatens Mr. Drummond to get him down to the testing floor, and in transition, his Outie accidentally pulls the trigger on the gun that was going to be used to kill the goat and instead kills Mr. Drummond. I have thought a couple of times, on top of the brain seizing up to switch personalities, as to kind of see their eyes roll in the back of their head when they're doing it, what else happens to their body when they transition from Innie to Outie and vice versa? And how many times can you realistically go back and forth before something seizes too hard and just snaps or breaks in your body? Outie Mark uses the blood of Mr. Drummond to get into the Cold Harbor room and takes Gemma. When she steps through, for a brief moment, we have Outie Mark and Gemma finally together. It's such a sweet moment and finally an accomplishment that we can all cheer for, but we know there's more to go. So they run to the elevator, go up, and turn into Innie Mark and Miss Casey. Innie Mark knows what's up, so he drags along a confused Miss Casey all the way to the door that Helly kept trying to run out of when she first woke up on the Sever floor. We now know that when she was going out, she was turning into Helena and just turned right back around and went in. And I'd love to see the frustrated look on Helena's face as she kept having to go back in each time Heliara would try to leave. Miss Casey does go through the door and turns back into Gemma, and Mark lets it close behind her. So now, Innie Mark and Gemma are only separated by a doorway, and that's the only thing keeping this from being a happily ever after ending. But we had to have a season 3, so what happens? Mark sits and questions, do I want to leave and potentially die and lose Heliara forever, or do I want to stay and try to fight? Of course, just then, Helly walks behind him, and we know at that point, oh snap, he is not going to leave with Gemma. Gemma's screaming for Mark on the other side as Mark backs up, chooses Helly, and they run off together, ending season 2 and leaving us with a whole new list of questions. I still think Helly would have ultimately encouraged Mark to go through the door by the way she was talking earlier. I feel like she's willing to sacrifice herself to make Mark happy and take down Lumon. That's why I think it's still Helena at the end of the show. So the main question is, are we Team Innie and rooting for Mark S. and Heliara to make it? Or are we Team Outie and rooting for Mark and Gemma Scout to make it? I'm definitely on the side of Mark getting out and basically killing Innie Mark. I get that he loses a whole part of himself and Innie Mark has to die for that to happen, but Helly is always going to be Helena, and they just can't be Innies forever. They know nothing of the world. They actually have a whole conversation in this episode whether or not the equator is a building or not. They would be screwed in the real world. I also think completing reintegration would be a bad idea for Mark. It just needs to be Outie Mark and Gemma, and let's call it a day. However, I could see an angle where instead of Innie Mark and Helly, it's Innie Mark and Helena, and they both are aware of who each other are. Helena clearly has a strained relationship with her father, and there are points in Helena's planning where she both wants power through her family and in spite of her family as well. I'm also not sold that reintegration is just a pipe dream on the outside, and that maybe Lumon does have some sort of reintegration process should they need it. I feel like you don't create a poison without also creating the antidote, so I can't imagine they would sever without a way to unsever. So I could see Helly and Helena be one in a much easier way than what Mark was doing, and of course, like Petey did that ended up killing him. The big question, though, is would Mark be willing to be with Helena in order to also be with Helly? The other aspect of the show that has had me intrigued from the beginning is the board. We see Natalie, the speaker for the board, start to show some emotions of her own this season when dealing with Mr. Milchick and the potential racism within Lumon, but nothing has really happened with that yet. We still don't know who the board is. We also don't know who was speaking through the robot in the finale either. There are just so many hidden cogs in the machine that we're still trying to figure out, so I know there's still plenty to talk about from a big picture standpoint with Lumon on top of Mark's individual story with Gemma and Helly. The main questions I have moving forward are, first, will we see Irving again? I assume we will, but we'll see. Also, how many other test subjects have there been? What's their story, and why was Gemma chosen this time? I do have a theory in a second. What's the connection with Devin and Lumon and Rickon and Lumon other than what we've seen? How will Innie Mark ever do anything when he knows Outie Mark is right there and now probably waiting to kill him, essentially? Does Outie Mark go to jail if Innie Mark gets in trouble for killing Drummond, even though it was kind of an accident? Are we 100% sure that the files Irving, Helly, Dylan, and even Petey were refining were also Gemma files, or are there other people that they're working on? What does Cobell want out of all this? Where did Regavi go? Who were the weird doppelganger characters in the forest, and where are they now? And then, of course, the big picture question, what is Kier's ultimate goal with everything that's going on? And then the real question is, how much more will we see from the choreography and merriment department? You can't just tease us and not bring it up again. One of the biggest theories I followed throughout the show was twofold. First, what they were refining was kind of a new way of severing, and I think that's kind of true since we know they were refining Gemma and her various severance tests. And then B, that Lumon's ultimate goal had something to do with babies and creating new life. There were a ton of signs that pointed in that direction, so I thought it may be the case, and it still may be. But between Helena knowingly sleeping with Mark, and then Mark and Helly doing it after, plus a whole storyline with Gemma going to a Lumon clinic for IVF, and then the whole Lumon birthing retreat where Devin has her kid, which is why I think there's already a tie there, and we see a whole storyline of a baby being born by an Innie so the Outie doesn't have to deal with it, it does seem to track. I do also wonder if Helly may be pregnant from either time that she slept with Mark, and what may ultimately happen with that. I could see that being the case, and Helly maybe has to sacrifice herself, and Mark and Gemma end up with that kid as their own. That's actually somewhat more of a happy ending, and not a lot from the show has been super happy so far, so we'll see. There's still a lot we need to learn from Severance. A good show typically asks a bunch of questions, then answers those questions in a satisfying way, while also asking another set of questions to keep us on the edge. Ben Stiller said that he was originally going to make the season 2 ending with Mark between the two women, and we were kind of left with a cliffhanger on which one he would choose. Instead, we know Innie Mark's choice was Helly, and now we got to wait to see how that plays out from here. The bigger picture of Lumon is still at play, and we learned about Kier's eternal war against pain, and how through Severance, Gemma was able to deal with the baby crib without pain, although, like I mentioned earlier, they maybe didn't think that one all the way through, or even know the truth around the circumstances. I've seen some people bring up that maybe Lumon is chasing immortality, since Jaime Egan is getting on up there in age, but maybe there's a way to chase immortality, but in the mind instead of the body, and so maybe a severance chip can be implanted in a new body to continue somebody's life. Or maybe achieve immortality in the virtual sense, similar to what we had in an episode of Black Mirror with San Junipero, where minds get uploaded to a virtual world when you die, or like the Valley Beyond in Westworld. One article I read said that Mark and Gemma were so important to the project because they had experienced such trauma and pain that if Lumon could separate them, sever the parts of the brain that remember pain, then they could be on the path to ending suffering and creating kind of a technology-assisted utopia. Mark saw Miss Casey without triggering trauma with Gemma, and then Gemma runs through a series of stressful situations without remembering Mark. So maybe the world could be severed from ever experiencing pain, kind of as we saw at the birthing retreat, and then there's kind of a perfect society for Lumon without any negatives to it. So that's where we are now. There are so many questions still to be answered, but we did kind of get a clearer path to an ending with Innie Mark ultimately choosing Heliar instead of choosing his own Outie and Gemma. I can't wait for season 3, and I do hope Ben Stiller stays true to his word that it won't take 3 years again. So, where will things go from here? Let me know in the comments your theories, and make sure to subscribe to the channel as I recap more TV shows such as The White Lotus, we have Black Mirror coming out, plus movie reviews, entertainment news, and so much more.